I feel like I keep coming back to Heathrow Airport on this channel, which is a bit weird for a train guy, and I consider it to be a bad habit. Anyway, while I was researching the history of Hounslow West Station, I came across a section in a book that caught my eye. A discussion of a pair of tube lines I'd never heard of before. Express tube lines from the West End to Heathrow Airport. The book was The Piccadilly Tube by Mike Horn, which to my mind is the definitive history of the Piccadilly line, and I would thoroughly recommend it to anyone with an interest in this particular railway. And as so often happens, it sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole. Anyway, Heathrow. As you probably know, there are two rail connections between Heathrow Airport and central London. The oldest is the Piccadilly line, opened in 1977. More recent is the main line connection used by the Heathrow Express, the defunct Heathrow Connect service, and now the Elizabeth line. But things could have been quite different. It all started in 1946. On the 25th of March that year, Heathrow opened as a civilian airport under the name London Airport. There had been an airfield there since 1929, which underwent massive expansion during the Second World War. London was in need of an airport at that time. Croydon Airport had proven inadequate, and Heathrow was one of several contenders for the main London airport at that time. So that was that problem solved. Now there was another problem. Heathrow was in the middle of nowhere. It could be reached by road, but that wasn't ideal. Croydon had a rail connection, albeit not a very direct one. So Heathrow, it was felt, should also have one. But, better. I should also explain that air travel was somewhat different back then. In those days, things were done city centre to city centre. How did that work? Well, instead of having the terminal at the airport, you'd have it in the centre of town. Then once passengers had checked in, they'd have to get to the airport proper. I'm sure you, the intelligent and perspicacious viewer, have figured out several problems with this, particularly given that the airport was many miles from the terminal. London Transport proposed instead a tube line from somewhere in West London to Heathrow Airport. The London end, as it were, would likely have been either near to Gloucester Road or north of Hyde Park. The line would have been totally separate from the rest of the tube. It would have had no intermediate stops, and it would only have been for airline passengers. In a sense, it would have been the Heathrow Express 50 years early. Well, probably a lot less than 50 by the time it was built, but let me have my poetic turn of phrase. This proposal doesn't seem to have got very far, largely because it wasn't quite one thing or the other. At that time, the number of people using Heathrow Airport was a fraction of what it was, 50 years later, so it was hard to justify a tube line purely for airport customers. But on the other hand, London Transport felt that there was no point in having an airport tube that stopped en route or that was shared with ordinary passengers. Well, obviously they didn't stick to that, but that's why the 1946 plan didn't go ahead. Mostly didn't go ahead. We'll come back to that. In 1947 they came up with a new plan which was known as Route K and was a branch off the Central Line. This one would have come off the Central Line at Marble Arch and run straight to North Acton without stopping. Now here's where things get interesting. The Central Line, the original one, would now terminate at North Acton, and west of there the new line would take over the old line to Ealing Broadway. Then it would go on to the main line and run over that to Windsor, and at Southall there would have been a branch to Heathrow Airport. I think we can add this to the long list of Proto-Elizabeth line schemes. It partially shadows the Central Line but with limited stops, and it goes to Heathrow Airport. This, of course, also didn't happen. At least in part because of the Transport Act of 1947, which would see both London Transport and the mainline railways of Britain nationalised. In 1948 another new concept came along, and this was rather closer to what we got, yet also different. This one would have involved extending the District Line. The situation with the District and Piccadilly lines was this. The Piccadilly line only went as far as Hounslow West, but the District Line also went there. West of Northfields, both lines shared track. The idea here was that from Northfields to Hounslow East, 2 extra tracks would be added and the 2 services would be separated out. The district would skip everything west of Hounslow East and zip off to the airport. This made a lot of sense. Hounslow West proved to be quite problematic when the actual extension was built. The line had to be completely relaid, to the extent that it didn't even pass through the original station anymore. The old station building is connected to the new platforms by means of a long corridor. The District Line trains, then as now, were larger than the Piccadilly Line trains, so they could cope better with luggage. The whole thing has a feeling of so near yet so far. So why didn't we get that version? Why did they not at least extend the District Line from Hounslow West rather than the Piccadilly? Well, a couple of reasons. One was historical. The Piccadilly Line was already an express tube, kinda. If you're at all familiar with the Piccadilly Line, you'll know that it runs along roughly the same route as the District, between South Kensington and Acton Town, but it skips several stations. Since it therefore offered a quicker route into central London than the District, the powers that be figured it made sense to put the Heathrow passengers on those trains. Had there been an airport in the 1920s, when that part of the Piccadilly Line was being planned, perhaps the planners would have made the District the express line instead. But they didn't. Hindsight is, as they say, 2020. The other big reason was that the Piccadilly Line, well, wasn't big. In order to get to the centre of Heathrow Airport, the line would have to proceed underground. The underground has been pretty hard up ever since the Second World War. Smaller tunnels were cheaper tunnels, so the Piccadilly Line was cheaper than any alternative scheme. The 1973 stock, the new trains designed with the extension in mind and still in service as of June 2025, did have extra luggage space built into them, so that was something at least. Now, if you're a regular viewer, you may recall that I've skipped over a number of other schemes here. There were a couple of ideas for monorails, and aside from the Piccadilly Line, there was a plan to branch off the main line at Feltham. There were two other tube schemes in 1947, but I haven't covered them because they were part of a much bigger general scheme that I'm currently trying to find out more about. There was a gap of over 30 years between Heathrow Airport opening to the public and the Underground arriving. The Heathrow extension didn't fully open until 1977. But in the meantime, the 1946 scheme saw a curious revival of sorts. After the war, the Central London Air Terminal was at Waterloo, and passengers were transported from there to Heathrow by coach or, if they were fancy, by helicopter. London Transport and British Railways wanted something better located, ideally a bit further out of centre so as to offer better road access. The idea of an air terminal in West London near Gloucester Road was resurrected. In 1957, the West London Air Terminal opened. It was located on top of a disused bit of London Transport land, formerly a railway line known as the Cromwell Curve, approximately where the Sainsbury's is now. Passengers were transported in specially built Routemaster coaches hauling luggage trailers. Increasing numbers of passengers at Heathrow and worsening traffic in central London pushed the tube extension forward as a priority. In 1974, the terminal closed, with all facilities transferring to the airport proper. So, the end solution was not ideal. The Piccadilly line was slow. The Heathrow Express came along in 1998, as did the slower but still faster than the tube Heathrow Connect service. In 2022, the Elizabeth line brought another option, with a fast line running right from the very centre of town and beyond. It takes approximately half an hour to get from Paddington to Heathrow by the Purple train, which I think is pretty good going. It just wasn't exactly plain sailing to get there. Well, I do hope you enjoyed this stop-skipping tale from the tube. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like, as always, to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for supporting this channel. You are the extra luggage space to my Piccadilly line trains. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.